Hi, welcome to Storytime in the Pollinator Garden. I'm Pam from Lincoln City Libraries, and this is Sheldon from the UNLV lab. We've learned about honeybees, wild bees, butterflies, and other pollinators. How do these insects pollinate plants? What plants are important to them for food and shelter? And why native plants?
Yeah, so the reason we want to go with mostly native plants is because that is what the insects in our area are used to eating.
Okay.
So they're going to have specific emergence times that might coincide with a plant. They might only be able to digest the things that are in that plant.
Okay.
And then on top of that, a lot of native plants are going to do a lot better in this ecosystem where they actually are used to growing.
Okay.
So if I take something from Asia and bring it to America, not only is it not going to be recognized by a lot of the insects, but it also could spread and start to take over and become invasive.
Okay.
So that's why we want to emphasize native plants. We're not going to be extreme and say you have to get rid of your prize roses or your heirloom plant, but the majority of things that you should be looking for, especially if you want to help the ecosystem around you, need to be native plants.
Okay. So what are some native plants?
Yeah, so we're surrounded by them. They're pretty great. A lot of people call them weeds. You might even see them in the ditches or the prairies.
Okay.
But we've got some right around us right here. So over here, we've got what's called Baptisia. And it's also called wild indigo. And you
I
can
love
see,
this one.
Yeah, it's starting to bud out.
Okay.
And we'll have some footage of some better ones that are a little further along.
Okay.
But the really cool thing about this specialist relationship with this plant is the flowers are strong enough held together that only the biggest, strongest bees can open them. And those are bumblebees. So this only feeds bumblebees.
I didn't know that.
Other bees can't get in here. Honeybees can't, little specialist native bees, they can't get into these flowers because they're tightly held together.
Sure.
And only when you see a bumblebee land on this, you'll see her take two of her legs and pry it open so she's nice and strong, and then she can stick her head in there.
All right.
So this is a great one for feeding those queen bumblebees in the spring.
All right.
And then another thing about spring is you might not have a lot of flowers on the ground that are blooming, but you get a lot of trees and a lot of bushes that are blooming. So over here, we've got what's called dogwood. And the cool thing about bushes is you put them there and then they're done and they kind of take care of themselves.
Sure.
You don't have to cut them back as much. The more you cut this one back though, it actually will make the twigs red, which is a really cool color change there.
So winter interest.
Oh yes, which people are always looking for with their landscapes.
Right.
This one has what's called 4-season interest. So it's got that, it's got the residual red with that green. It's got this nice flower in the spring that's blooming.
Okay, and then
it's got fruit, and then that's how it's got the 4 seasons.
Okay, so just pollinators in general like this one?
Yep, so this one has closer nectaries. They're not as long, so it's not as specialized, which I love because it'll feed multiple things.
Okay.
The cool thing too is not just pollinators, but the fruit later will feed birds.
Okay.
So it's that double duty that all these native plants, they're pulling double duty all the time. They're not just feeding pollinators. When their fruit is done, they're feeding birds and mammals and all these other creatures.
Ooh, what is this plant?
Well, that's really cool. This red flowering plant over here, this is the only native honeysuckle in Nebraska. There's 1 or 2 species that are close by, but this is called the coral honeysuckle, and it's red. So red is a color that bees can't see, and also you can see how long these nectar tubes are to get to the reward,
Sure.
which would be in the back.
Sure.
And so this is actually a plant that specifically is attracting birds. Specifically, our long-beaked friend, the ruby-throated hummingbird, which lives out here in Nebraska.
Okay.
It's the only hummingbird that's on the east side of North America. And then if you go west, there's many, many more species. But this is the common one that we have around here is the ruby-throated hummingbird.
Okay.
And they love the color red.
So birds can be pollinators too then?
They can. You can see it once she sticks her beak in there, she's going to get some of the pollen right on her beak.
Okay.
And then when she visits the next flower, it's going to drop it off.
All right.
And so bees can't see red, so they would just pass this by like it's nothing. There are some red flowers you might see bees on, like Monarda. There's red Monarda species, and they are called bee balms, and you'll have bees on them, but that's more from smell and color, less than from color, more from smell.
Okay.
But yeah, there's other invasive honeysuckles that have white flowers, but we don't really encourage people to plant those because they'll take over and they'll exclude a lot of habitat for creatures.
Huh, okay. All right, Sheldon, what's this plant?
Yeah, so this is called Amsonia, or blue star, because you can see it's got 5 little petals and it's blue, so blue star, right? Really simple name.
Okay.
This is another native genus of plants. Some of them are a little more east of Nebraska, but we say, hey, we're not gonna be sticklers, get it close, and it's still gonna be able to feed a lot of different bees.
Okay, so this is blue. Bees can see this one?
Yeah, so bees they can see blue. You're also gonna see a lot of flowers that have yellow. And if the cool thing about if it's yellow, like this dandelion might be yellow, but a bee is gonna see ultraviolet, so it might actually be darker and it'll guide them into the center of the plant. So what we're seeing might be just yellow, like a sunflower.
Okay.
But if the middle of the sunflower will actually have ultraviolet reflecting parts that will guide them into the flower.
So like a landing strip.
Exactly. Penstemon is another great one. When you get a good view of a penstemon, it'll actually have little track marks leading them into the middle, like a runway.
Okay.
Other ones like this, or some of the other flat-topped flowers, they're gonna not have as much because they're just a big landing pad. And so they can feed a lot more insects than flowers that have deeper nectaries, like the hummingbird one we saw, or like this one, you can see it's got a really deep nectar tube. Not as deep as the hummingbird one. So this one's probably for a long-tongued bee, like a bumblebee. So that's gonna be what you're gonna see on these flowers that have deeper corollas.
So I think you can do this. You can go on the internet and look up how bees see plants, like ultraviolet, or plants in ultraviolet light, so you can actually see the landing pads that you talked about. Yeah, they'll have these little dots leading up to them. Some of them will be in color and some won't. So the yellow flowers, if it looks like a plain old yellow flower to us, it doesn't look like that to them. And that's kind of the cool thing about how bees see. And even if your garden palette is like, oh, I want something else other than yellow, just know that those bees are seeing different things too. But yeah, Amsonia is a great option for that. And if you really want to see some good nectar guides, penstemon have really fun ones because they're called a beard tongue. So they have like a tongue part of the flower that sticks out. Trees.
Yes, let's go take a look at some trees. Those are another important one. Everyone wants to focus on the flowers that are close to the ground that I can get up and see. But trees are actually a really important one, especially in early spring. We like to say trees and shrubs in the spring, and a lot of forbs in the fall. A forb is just a plant that comes out of the ground and dies back in the winter. And those will get you all the way to fall usually.
Okay, so trees are really important too, right?
Absolutely. As far as native plants go, trees are gonna be really easy to incorporate in a landscape. They're the hard hitters. They also live a lot longer than humans sometimes too. So the 3 big species of trees to plant in the Midwest, and actually most of it across the entire United States, are going to be willows. Native willows, obviously. So weeping willows are from Asia. They might not feed as much, but native willows, native oaks. A good example would be bur oak or red oak. And then your cherries, or your prunus genus, which this is a black cherry, which is a native cherry species.
This looks like what I have, but I have choke cherries.
Yes, choke cherries are a relative, and they don't have this single trunk usually. They're going to be a thicket, so they're going to have a bunch of little trunks, but they look almost the exact same. They have these, I call them unicorn horn spikes of flowers, and they'll make little berries on these as well. Bees go absolutely nuts on these because you can see how many flowers are on just one spike. And so the cool thing about these is, since they're a native tree, they're going to be doing quadruple duty, right? So they're going to be providing shelter. They're going to be providing food when they bloom for bees. Then they also provide food for caterpillars when they have leaves. And then when they produce fruit, which you can see them starting to produce these little cherries, then they provide food for birds, which then eat caterpillars. So you have this whole ecosystem on one tree that can happen.
Wow. So has somebody already started, there's some holes in some of these leaves.
Yeah. So you can see if it looks like a chew marks, that could be from an insect. But if it looks like a little half moon circle,
like this one.
So this little half moon circle, that's probably from a leafcutter bee. So she lands on she could be eating lunch over here, but then she's like, okay, I got pollen for my babies, so I need to build a cradle for them. So she'll chew a little half circle, And looks like she actually used a couple leaves here.
Huh. Oh, yep.
And then she'll carry that underneath her legs, and then she'll use that to basically wrap around where she lays her eggs. So I call it building the cradle or the nursery.
Okay.
And so if you see this, usually they love prunus. They also like to use rose bushes sometimes.
All right.
Or raspberries. They'll cut little chunks out of the raspberries.
We have raspberries. Okay.
So I always tell people, like, if there's no leaf damage, if there's nothing eating your plants in your yard, then it's not part of the ecosystem. So we want things to be chewing on our plants, especially if they're native species. Maybe not Japanese beetles, but.
Okay. So like for this particular type of tree, is that something like the Arboretum would have, or would a nursery sell these?
Yeah, so some nurseries sell these. You can order, a lot of these native trees are from specialty nurseries. You can order them online, and what's called bare root, they'll ship them just as like a stick that has no leaves, and then you can bury them in the ground. But also other nurseries, the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum sells a lot of those as well. Okay. And so Prunus genus, there's a ton. There's even bush versions of this that get really, really small, called sand cherries.
Yes. Okay, I've heard of those.
And so there's a type of tree or bush for all of the different needs you'd need to use them for.
Awesome.
This one will get pretty tall, and so this is a great shade tree or something to put along, like in your front yard or something. Okay. Because it grows really fast. So you could even start it on a really cheap little tree. Yeah. And I've planted some, and within 3 years they're already about this tall.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's good to know. Thank you, Sheldon, for taking time to visit with us about trees and flowers and all kinds of native plants. I think people will be really interested to know what they can put in their yards and how they can attract some of these pollinators and some native birds and kind of help our ecosystem.
Absolutely. Love it. Thank you for inviting me. And again, like, if it's got the name weed on it, it might not be a weed. It might actually be something that's native here. So always do your research and learn more about this stuff. And that's kind of the fun of it too, is the discovering. I even figure out, oh, that's a new native species. I should try that here or there. Okay. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a blast.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for joining us for Storytime in the Pollinator Garden.